Hello, and welcome to Camp, Scary and Squee, a podcast that tests my theory that every horror movie exists on a scale of divine camp to pure terror. I'm your host, Damien O'Mara, and my guest today loves her horrors to come with strong mystery and intrigue, a solid investigation by rational protagonists, and a consistent mythology for evil because it has to make sense. Welcome, Nyari. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Damien. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, to get us started, a bit of an icebreaker, what has been haunting you this week?
I've been haunting myself this week. So my future self, 10 years in the future, has been haunting me, giving me advice, telling me that I need to exercise more and, be a bit more selfish. So yeah, that kind of thing.
I like that. Be a bit more selfish. Your 10-year self telling you to seize the moment and do things for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think, oh, that's just for me. It's not that important. Oh, that's just to decorate my wall. That's not important. So yeah, I definitely need to change that.
It's a good kind of haunting. I'm enjoying it. I think we all need that kind of haunting. Someone reminding us to be a bit, it sounds terrible to say, but being a bit selfish is a good thing.
Yeah, that's what my mom was telling me literally just yesterday. That sometimes if you put all your eggs in other baskets and not yourself, then, if other things don't work out, at least, you've invested in yourself as well. So I need to do a lot more work on that.
I think it's good advice. Thanks, Mum. And I want to hand over the honours to you to tell us what film we will be discussing today.
So this film that I've picked is Teeth, also known as Dentata. It came out in 2007. And it's about a young lady who discovers that she has teeth in her vagina.
Well, some quick stats before we talk about it. So, as you said, released in 2007. It's written and directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein. It stars Jess Wixler, John Hensley, Josh Pace, Hale Appleman, Ashley Springer, and Lenny Von Dolan. The film grossed $2.3 million on a $2 million budget, so it did not make a lot of money. It made its money back, which is, more that can be said for some films. And IMDb describes Teeth as still a stranger to her own body, a high school student discovers she has a physical advantage when she becomes the object of male violence. And a quick content warning that we'll talk about this film, and this does include discussions of rape in the context of the film, and also a spoiler warning because we're about to talk about what happens. So we were talking about this the other day, and you said that this is a film that everyone should see. So what about it makes you sort of feel that, or what makes you think people should see this film?
Well, I think the concept in itself is horrifying and satisfying, because I remember when it came out, it was around the time I was hearing a lot about United Nations peacekeepers, raping refugees and, trading sexual favors for, to give them food rations. And so when this came out, I thought, oh my gosh, the landscape of the world would completely change if women had vaginal dentata. And it really kind of flips the script, I think, on sexual violence. Because a lot of the times in so many horror films, you see, women being attacked, being raped. Men get attacked as well. But that kind of sexual violence being directed also at men is something you don't see a lot in cinema. So
no.
I think it's definitely a very interesting film, a very interesting concept that I really wish they had teeth to explore it even further.
It's something I found interesting in my research on this film. I went and had a look at the Rotten Tomatoes references, and it has a very, Rotten Tomatoes reviews, and it has a really high rating when it comes to the critical acclaim. But when you look at the ordinary punter, because they do those two separate reviews, it's about 50%. And when you look at it, you've got 1 star and 5 stars and nothing in between. And, I gotta kind of throw it out there. There were a lot of men that were like, how dare they? And it's something I find so interesting because women have been in horror, like women showing sexuality is part of those unwritten rules that if you show sexuality, you die. And, women have been in the cinema and in the film industry as a kind of trope are often punished for their sexuality. And this film, as you said, flips it on its head. It flips the script. It puts women in a position of power that they've not been awarded in the film, like in any genre that I'm aware of before. And to see this kind of, it's not a backlash because you could see it really was polarizing, but to see these people really react badly to it, it's like,
I made a point of not looking at any of the reviews or anything before this podcast, but I watched this again with my partner, and I do think that there's a very different reaction depending on whether you're looking at it from a female perspective or a male perspective. And, I think that it would be even more horrifying if you're a male looking at this and thinking of, oh my goodness, a universe where you could literally lose your penis and die for, not because you're rapey, but, making it the wrong sexual move, it would be potentially horrifying. And whereas for me as a woman, I'm like, yeah, finally you get that, like it's so many different ways of looking at it. And, I don't blame anyone for like feeling triggered, but I do think it's definitely a conversation worth having as to why you're triggered. And potentially, are you triggered by the dentata, or are you being triggered by her being a victim in some situations? These are really interesting concepts to explore.
Well, we'll get into talking about the plot of the movie, and this will hopefully be something that we can explore further as we talk about what happens. It's an interesting opening scene. We have this very long panning shot from very high up, and you see this power plant, which is really prominent throughout the entire film, and possibly something that we'll talk about as we talk about the ideas of mutations and evolution.
Yeah.
But you come to Dawn and her brother, and I'm going to forget his name already. Is it Brad? Yeah, it's Brad.
Yeah, it is Brad.
Dawn and Brad are, as children, in a kiddie pool, not getting along very well, but then there's a bit of a you show me yours, I'll show you mine kind of children thing going on. And Brad gets his finger bitten. What does that bring out for you as like an opening scene, considering how much we know going in? Like we know that this is a film about virginity.
Honestly, I think that was probably the least concerning scene. But, that whole idea of, abuse can start at a very early age. And, she probably wasn't aware of what had happened. He probably wasn't aware of what had happened as well, I think, on that level. But then was there like a kind of stalemate that they'd then had throughout like their years growing up after that incident that, she is off limits because of that? You really have to wonder, like, what did he think happened? And of course, he probably can't tell anyone what happened because that would expose him as well. So,
well, and who would believe him?
Yeah, you're making this up. Yeah. So I think it's ready to say, oh, she bit me with her mouth teeth. What do you call mouth teeth? Mouth dentata.
With her teeth.
Teeth, yeah.
And so we move from here and it cuts to kind of what we'll call present day. Dawn as I assume she's like 16, 17 years old. And clearly the actress is older because of the subject matter. And she's presenting to a group of young people about the promise. And this I find really interesting. And perhaps I was just a very different teenager, but if these people showed up and were like, hey, let's talk about the promise, I would not have been able to tell them to fuck off faster.
No, I think that's where we're very different. I think that's why this is one of my favorite films because I grew up in the church. I have been to abstinence talks. We didn't get rings, but we had to like sign a little contract with God or some nonsense like that. And how this is like the most precious gift you give your husband. So everything that was happening, I was like, oh my gosh, been there, done that. And I found like one of the scenes so hilarious because while she's talking all the white kids are looking so attentively at her. And if you go back and watch it, there's this little black girl with her arms crossed, like with her neck cocked, like, what the hell is going on? So yeah, I've been there, and just trying to and especially when I became more sexual, just trying to rationalize my upbringing with who I was becoming, and going through the whole, am I wrong? Is this natural? Do I still love God? So yeah, I found that whole aspect of it hilarious. The modest clothes, wearing a t-shirt under a tank top, because heaven forbid, he had me dying for days. It was so funny.
But that language as well is like that she uses, referring to everything as a gift, and it's precious, and you don't just give your gift to anyone. And it's insidious in that, like, there is some kind of, you do want to talk to people about agency and being able to make decisions, but they kind of take the power away from them. It becomes very like you have something that people want to take from you. And for I think everyone in that room, regardless of male or female or wherever in between, it begins this kind of binary conversation of women have this thing that men will eventually take.
Oh, absolutely. And that whole kind of, the value judgment that, if you've now lost your gift, you're no longer as valuable to someone you want to have a relationship with. Because what do you have to give now when you've already given up your best gift? It's a horrible narrative that a lot of people have had to really, try to detox from. It's awful.
It's so, like, a slightly personal perspective for me. Like, I grew up in a very Catholic kind of household, and so there was talk of things like abstinence, but I was also the gayest child you've ever met. And so that kind of talk, like, in my head, I was like, I've got a bigger thing to deal with, and so this stuff is happening. And I'm going, oh, I understand you're having that conversation, but that's not even on my radar yet. I've got, not to say that it's bigger, but, there was another hurdle I had to overcome before that conversation was relevant to me.
It's so funny. There's this line in the movie where the pastor's speaking in the background, and it was like, oh, even masturbation is wrong. There are no loopholes. There's no back door. And
Yes.
It always reminded me of that whole, in some cultures, as long as it's anal, it's fine. You're still a virgin. You can go wear your white dress. It's fine. Oh
God. We do the next up. She's off stage. It's right. He's saying there are no loopholes when she sees her friends Alicia and Phil, who I don't know if their names are ever said in the film. I had to do some deep Googling to find out what the names of those characters were.
Yeah.
But she also meets Toby. And immediately we've got romantic music, but sinister romantic music almost. It's playing, and there's a lot of very meaningful eye contact between these kind of mid shots, getting closer and closer and closer as they cut back and forth, which I think is to signify that there's an instant attraction between these two people.
Electrifying.
Yes, they're both very beautiful young people. Attraction is expected. It doesn't immediately pick up to anything. It's kind of sets it, and then we go back to normal life, and there's a few things we kind of learn in the next sort of coming scene, so we can run through them. Her mum is sick. Her brother is dealing with some things. He's very into heavy metal music, not a big deal, but clearly does not feel like he belongs in his family and has rebelled. I assume is an adult and living at home and has his he's smoking pot and whatever, and for this conservative Christian family would be a very big deal, something that they're not sure how to deal with.
It doesn't seem like they were worried too much about him. I didn't hear any of his parents say anything about his lifestyle to them.
The only thing that was her father says, oh, you're a blessing, and the mother says both our children are blessings. And I couldn't work out, they're stepbrother and sister, so the parents married, and it's her mother and his father, but clearly have been in each other's lives for a very long time and, view each other as mum and dad. The next big thing we get is sex ed at school. So like illustration of a penis and discussion of that particular appendage. And then they turn the page to find the vagina has been covered with a big golden sticker. It's like one of those, like, you know, in those like terrible catalogs when something's on sale and it's like a big jagged shape that says sale. It's like that, but stuck over the picture of the vagina. And we have this really weird teacher interaction, which was very foreign to me because I went to a public school in Australia and like this would just never happen. Like our sex ed was very open. And he's like, well, rightly, the board has hidden this picture because you cannot deal with this. You're not, that's something that, and it kind of creates this sense that like it expands on that thing we said at the start, like the vagina is this kind of gift and like
you can't open the gift, you can't see what's inside until the right time.
But it also, you and I, we had a very brief conversation yesterday before this. I think, and it's not so much the teacher, but this kind of, I almost look at the big bad as being this kind of societal attitude that they create, because they're kind of creating, by creating, and I think it's something that happens in the world, by creating this sense that this is this huge deal and this is going to be such a big thing to give away and we're going to hide it from you because if you see it, you're corrupted. They're kind of creating a situation where people don't know how to control themselves. Like, I think all those people should control themselves, but this situation doesn't help.
Well, 100%. Like, you'll read about, you know, states in America where, you know, parents are very religious and the government or in that state is also very religious, and they've legislated do not teach our children about sex in school. So that's about the parents. And then you'll then hear that, you know, Christian teenagers are more likely to fall pregnant because they feel like it would be even more sinful to plan for sex or, you know, prepare and have protection ready. So it's like it adds all these layers of, like, I guess, mind games for these poor young people trying to navigate it. And
well, and not I was going to say, not having those conversations about enthusiastic and repeated consent. You're right about protection. Like no one's on the pill. No one's using condoms, or someone does use a condom later on. It's very good to see. Still doesn't work out for him. But yeah, it's sort of I just watch it and I think, what did they think was going to happen? But these teenagers who have been given no tools to manage what is going on inside their body do stupid fucking things.
Well, what they believe in is the blood of Jesus to fix it all. Sorry, Christians out there. What I found really interesting in that scene is one of the students asked, well, how come you showed us the male private area and not the female? And she's like, well, it's because women are just more naturally modest. And it you see also that play out in like Christian circles that, you know, sometimes, you know, young men do sin, in quotation marks, have sex. It's not as big a deal as when a young lady sins. I don't know why I'm calling them ladies. Yeah, but whatever. So, yeah, it's just, women's purity, women's gifts are seen as more important to be preserved than male gifts.
Yeah, and it's very much holding a mirror up to sort of say, we are doing this and we're creating these situations as a culture.
Yeah.
There is a building attraction between Toby and Dawn, and they go to the movies. The movies was weird when they were like, even the PG-13 will have heavy kissing. You know, yeah, it probably will. Might be good for everyone to see that and just
I mean, they probably wouldn't have even gone to watch The Incredibles. Did you know how the Incredibles, there's a lot of zoom ins on Mrs. Incredible's body?
Yes. It would not be okay.
No.
But there's so there's this building attraction. They go to the forest, and there's really like laboring those slow motion camera scenes where it's clearly she's looking at him and seeing something. And that night in bed, after seeing a scorpion on television, it's very important to note, like my note on this says fantasy wedding wank. Because she's imagining him dressed as a groom, her dressed as a bride, and like really getting into it. And and eventually, like, his clothes disappear and it's all...
Well, that's the only context in which a fantasy would be legal, I guess, in her mind.
Yeah.
That, I'm actually just fantasizing about being married. This isn't me being a little horn dog,
But then the scorpion monster comes to her mind. Little did she know how foreshadowing that was.
I think she always knew something was up, but didn't know exactly what.
Well, and the next day we get the locker room phone call. And before, putting aside how weird it is, while both naked and wrapped in towels, to call each other in opposite locker rooms, which I think is a very odd thing to do. In the background of the men's locker room, there is a coach just standing around watching them.
I totally missed that.
It's all I could see. I was just like, why is that man watching these people undress?
I don't remember what teen movie it was where the coach's office like overlooked the locker rooms, and I was like, what a weird place to have his office.
What I want to know is that just a thing in movies, or is that what America is like? Because that's very problematic.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Locker rooms should be very private places. But they do have she calls him on her mobile or cell, as I guess they would say, and they can't see each other anymore. And he's very understanding. You're just laughing at it like, this is ridiculous.
I'm laughing at it because I feel like I've been there, because I can't see you anymore because the temptation is just too great.
Really?
So for that reason, we just need to stay away from each other. We can't, try to figure out how to manage our attraction and emotions in a way that's consistent with our beliefs. So cutting off contact.
God, it's such an unhealthy approach to life. Like, I've had I've kind of had that conversation after breaking up with someone, and one or both of us has been like, this, if we're to remain friends, this would turn into something that we don't want it to be anymore. But this idea of being friends and just being like, well, I'm so into you that if we're friends, I will lose control. Everyone needs some therapy and some techniques to manage their impulses, is what I'm learning about this. But it doesn't even last that long, because it's like 10 minutes later in the movie, and she's
next minute,
she's at the I've called it a swimming hole. Is it
I don't know,
waterfall pool that people swim in?
Lake.
She's there and she calls
contaminated lake,
and he speeds there. It's like she told him she's about to die. And he's like driving his Jeep and just like zooming through this dirt road, skids to a stop. It's like, hi.
I know. And it's like, you're practically, the abstinence queen. And at this point, has she just like given in to her lust and, called him? Because, in Christian circles, you don't meet up with a guy, just the two of you. You've got to have your brothers and sisters there as your chaperones, and chaperone each other. You are your brother's keeper. So here she is, basically inviting him to meet her alone in a place they know is a makeout spot. But early on they were like, it's only a makeup spot at night.
It was daytime.
So maybe that's what she convinced herself. Like, no. We just have to talk this out, just the two of us. But I think, sometimes you're a young person. Your desires and your passions sometimes do lead you down a rabbit hole. So
she brought her swimming costume. They go for a swim and swim to it's like a waterfall, and behind the waterfall is a kind of cave.
A cave, yeah.
And there's a random blanket there that she wraps herself in, and this disturbed me. It's just like, well, no, don't take the blanket that you found in the cave and wrap yourself in it. That's not a good
Disgusting.
idea. But this is the first moment where it's kind of like it's a real turning point that Toby is, I think to some degree he's interested and she's interested and they kiss, but he then takes it much further, much faster. We should say that slightly earlier, I think it's the first, before they've decided to stop hanging out, he talks about only being pure in his eyes, which I don't really know what that means.
So there's this concept in Christian circles of being a born-again virgin. So you could have been biggest slut, and then you pray to God to forgive you because you've realized the error of your ways, and then maybe the pastor or someone will pray over you, and then it's like, great, in the eyes of God, you are now a virgin. You're starting on a clean slate. That's what that's all about.
It's kind of like, look, it's not, but it makes me think of like Catholicism and confession.
Yeah.
Where you sort of go in and you're like, I did these wrong things, and they're like, say 10 Hail Marys, and that's kind of your atonement for, like, I don't know. They make you do it when you're really young. I can't remember any of the things I said, but I always remember the priest being like, is that it? I'm like, I'm not talking to you about my life. I'm here because my parents brought me.
Yeah.
This then turns into it turns into a rape scene where she says no. She emphatically says no. And he says, what does he say? I haven't jacked off since Easter.
Sorry, not funny. But
I know it's not funny, but it also is like just
dude,
jack off then. There's a really easy solution here. Go home. There's internet. She searches for vagina dentata later in this. There's internet. Go home. Google Pornhub. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
But alas, he kind of hits her head against the back of a rock. She passes out for a second, and he takes this very awful opportunity to be like, right, I'm in. And in that process, vagina dentata activates. Yeah, and that's the sound it makes. And he just starts screaming, and he steps back. His dick is on the ground, and he's screaming, and he kind of falls off back into the water, and she cowers. Like, you would be terrified. Like, not only is someone...
What the hell happened?
Someone's just raped you, their dick has come off. I know we shouldn't laugh, but it is billed as a horror comedy.
Yes, true.
Look, and to his credit, Appleman, that performance, like, I believed that his dick just got bitten off.
And I can't remember if that was the first really graphic one, but maybe it was the next one. But, like, it was pretty graphic and actually showing what was left of the
see
man.
Everything. There's blood pissing out, quite literally.
Squirting out, and it was just really visceral. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. Which I actually appreciated rather than just, implied that this has happened. So that was done really well.
I'm trying. What happens next? Oh, she returns. Oh, she goes home, and then she returns to her next purity speech because her first one was so good and and has a breakdown on stage, to which the pastor like kind of steps in because Billy can see something bad has happened. Doesn't counsel her in any way, just kind of says, get off the stage, I'll take over from here. And she runs into Ryan, who drives her home, and Ryan's kind of had a bit of a crush on Dawn for a while.
Yeah.
We see. But alas, he asks her out on a date. She says no. And she returns to the cave to see a crab crawling over the penis. So she has another scream.
It looked like the crab was humping the severed penis.
Well, like, crabs are kind of like scavengers, aren't they? Like, they eat, like, carcasses and things that fall to the bottom of the ocean.
Anything, yeah.
So that makes sense. But after that, she throws her purity ring off the cliff.
Of course. Because even if you're raped, you're no longer pure. Don't you know this?
God, the world's fucked.
Yep.
And this is where we get our generic search engine of vagina mutations, where she finds vagina dentata, driving her to then go see a gynecologist. And I think this is the point where the film kind of shifts from, like, you know, there's a really long build up to the first kind of incident, and now it's just packing them all in for the second half. We're just like, everything's going to happen really quickly. And watching this scene, and I, in case you haven't guessed, have never had to go to a gynecologist. But for me, like, I have seen this before, but for me, I was watching it and going, this mostly seems normal. Like, it seems awkward, but maybe it's really awkward the first time you go to a gynecologist. And he's sort of saying, scoot down, scoot down, scoot down. And it feels very kind of, this is just run of the mill for him. He sees 50 vaginas a day and it's not a big deal. For me, nothing felt off until the bare hand. But I would be interested to know, for you watching that, where's the point where you go, uh-oh?
Absolutely, him taking off his glove. And I think, this film does so well in kind of highlighting some of, well, at least I can't speak for all women, but my fears, of being woman, date rape, by someone you really, really liked up until that moment, abuse by, a doctor, someone who's supposed to be trustworthy, being abused by a family member as well. Like, these are just all these horrible things that have been highlighted in this, person's experience over what feels like, just 48 hours. It's just gone from the height of purity to this, everything terrible is happening to her.
There is a question here, because in many horror films, it's really easy to go, that's the villain, that's the protagonist. I watch this one and I think, while she's the person harming people, she's not the villain. Like, she's the protagonist, and it's the people who she harms she's protecting herself from.
Well, we're also seeing that she's not harming them on purpose. She's discovering how her dentata actually work in the first place. So, what is it? Toby's death accident. She didn't know that was going to happen.
The doctor.
She didn't know what was going to happen with the doctor as well.
Well, and that scene, I know it's meant to be funny in that, like, his hand, like, it's bitten onto it, and he's trying to pull his hand out, and she flips over, and he's kind of flinging it back and forth. Really,
I wonder how they filmed it, because his hand and her body movements were in sync.
Yeah.
So if she tried to swivel around the table, his hand was going with her. So it's very interesting how they. I'd love to know how they filmed that scene.
Yeah.
And early on in that appointment, he's like, "Oh, so you've never been to a gynecologist before, so you don't know what to expect." And that's, I think, when in his mind, he's like, "Great," because a lot of people at that age might go with their parent or something, so there's always someone in the room. But nah, she had no one, and she couldn't have possibly expected that the doctor would try to take advantage like that.
It was a very confronting scene to watch. It's that moment where he starts putting lube on his bare hand, and I just think, oh my God. Like, she's just had a really bad experience.
Yeah. And I think the gross part, for everyone listening, is he's like, all right, so I'm now just going to test your flexibility. And he ends up getting 4 of his fingers chomped off. And it was just like, what the fuck? It was just such a horrible moment. But again, there have been cases of doctors, taking advantage of women in their care. So an unfortunate reality. But,
Yeah.
ah,
Well, and that's the thing, is this film is not, there is a fantasy element in terms of what's going on with her, but this film is not saying that these are not things that are out of the question. And often for me, that's the scariest kind of horror. Like, you know, supernatural horror and jump scares, it's like, oh, I had a jump scare, but that's kind of the end of it. Whereas this kind of horror, it kind of sticks with you because you just go, oh my God, like the bad things that were happening to her are happening in this world.
Yep.
So next, Toby's body is discovered. Because I think they found his penis first and then they were diving for the body.
No, they found his body and they couldn't find his penis.
Ah.
Because I think maybe he'd been missing. I don't know. And so, yeah, they found him at the bottom of the lake because she was looking for him as well. Calling his house, calling his cell, asking her friends. But yeah, she didn't know he was dead. She thought maybe he was in hiding.
Yeah, because he did something awful and had his dick chopped off. So she's freaking out. She gets home. Her mum has collapsed because we had found out her mum was sick. And right at the end of that particular scene, we see Brad just off screen with his door open having sex with, I've already forgotten her name.
Never even wrote her name down.
I don't even know if they said it. I read it somewhere. It doesn't matter. His girlfriend.
Yeah.
And they end up in hospital. Her mum's unwell and she's in a very bad place, and she goes to the only place that she can think of, which is Ryan, who had been making eyes at her throughout the film, but had given her that ride back from the promised meeting. And clearly she was like, well, you know, this is a place to go. And she kind of tells him everything.
And it's weird that, you know, why didn't she go to her so-called friends? And maybe there's that element of, you know, maybe shame and fear of telling your Christian folk that what's happened. And maybe this new person who seemed really nice and without any baggage felt more safe to her than her Christian friends, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. Something I found interesting about this is he gives her something to calm her down, but essentially drugs her and gives her champagne. Like, I was watching that going, like, how this scene ended with him and her having sex after he's like used that little vibrator on her and kind of tamed the teeth, as it were. But she's drugged.
So the first time I watched this, you know, I was like, oh, you know, he was a nice guy and he was non-rapey, great, blah, blah, blah. And then the second time around, I was like, wait a minute. Did he? Yeah, he gave her something that made her feel fuzzy. Then he plied her with some shampoos. And then there's a moment where he's like, oh, just rest here on my shoulder. And next minute, I almost thought that, is she waking up to him fondling her? Or because I was very confused by that.
Yeah. Look, what ends up happening is they have sex and nothing bad happens to him.
She emphatically consents, although I do think her defenses were down quite a bit because of alcohol and medication, yeah. Yeah.
But the next morning, she's kind of feeling good about it. Until this is the thing, like, so I take what I'm guessing he doesn't think it's real.
Of course not. He's just, you know, making her feel accepted and heard because he's trying to get into her pants.
Yeah, because the next morning they're having sex again, and his phone rings and he answers it. She's like, "What?
Why?"
Like, maybe I was never a teenage boy, but the idea of doing that is just insane. And to his own detriment, he reveals that sleeping with her was a bet, and he's just won, and he's telling his friend on the phone. And I think it's my favorite kind of moment of this film where you hear the squelchy, crunchy penis biting sound, and she goes, "Oh shit!"
Again, another accident. She didn't know this was going to happen. She actually didn't even know he was going to survive sex that night.
Yeah.
So this is her just learning. And it's just interesting that, she had opened up to him, and then he used the information she provided him to kind of convince her that it's okay. She's like, because, when she's like, no, we shouldn't have sex because, the teeth will get you. He's like, no, I'm the hero. I'm the one who's going to conquer the teeth.
Yeah.
It's like, it was all like, it was just nonsense on his part. But this is the only, death or, castration / murder. We don't know if he dies.
Oh, no, he doesn't die. There's a scene later where the doctor's reattaching his dick and he goes, it hardly seems worth it.
Oh, good. Okay. So he's not dead. But I thought this was he was the only one who I thought might not have deserved it. Because, for example, him giving her the pills and the shampoos, I don't know if he was consciously doing it because he's trying to weaken her defenses. I actually think that maybe he was just an idiot and just doing it. And it seems as if his biggest crime was just being a bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
Because, she did consent. And I'm like, should he lose his dick for being a jerk? And maybe not.
Maybe that's why the film has the doctors reattach it. They're like, well, in this instance, we should show it being reattached. Although because there's a scene with the gyno as well, and he's getting his fingers reattached. And the doctor says, "You sure you don't want to tell us what happened?" And he just shakes his head and he puts the gas on himself. It's like ages later, I'm like, those fingers aren't gonna reattach. Those nerves are gone.
Yeah.
So what happens next? I know what happens next. So after Ryan, she returns to the hospital and her mum has died. And quite a sad scene, because you see the nurse crying, watching her, and it pans to her in bed, on the hospital bed, hugging her mother who's died, and it's really sad. And I think something that's been quite interesting is this film is really dominated by what's happening to her, and there's like life going on around her. It's so much shitty stuff is happening to her, and I think it helps explain how we get to where we're about to get to. Because Dad does try and kick Brad out now that his wife has died, and as far as I understand, Brad is his kid, so clearly his wife was a moderating force in that sense, that she was like, you need to care for your children, even though he doesn't appreciate us and he's quite disrespectful. But Brad sicks his dog on his mother, which is a terrible name for a dog. And I guess is showing that he's like not going to take this kind of shit, and he's gonna stick around as much as he wants.
Well, absolutely, and as a disrespect to his stepmom as well, that I'm going to call this dog Mother, maybe because his dog's a better mother than you, or maybe because I think you're a bitch. It could be interpreted any kind of way.
Yeah. But it gives us this kind of, everyone has to return to the hospital, and Dawn sees her dad. It's a very emotional scene, but Brad's girlfriend is there. Clearly has driven him to the hospital and lets her know that Brad heard her mum screaming and told her to ignore it. And Dawn has this moment of realization. There's like a close shot showing this kind of determination as she goes home. She puts on makeup, and I know this shouldn't be something I focus on, but it does not look good. It's like,
it barely made any difference to the makeup.
It's just like a block of blue eyeshadow and some lipstick. But I get it. She's not grown up putting on makeup. This is her first time, and it's something that requires practice. And she goes in and seduces her brother.
I love this. Yeah, that sounds terrible. I love this part because this is the first time she's actually used her dentata deliberately for something that she wanted, which is, she's upset at how he's completely disrespected her mom and her mom's life, and she holds him responsible for her death, and whether he deserves to die or not, regardless, this is the first time she's like, right, I figured out how this works, and this is what I'm going to do, and she just goes for it. So yeah, absolutely love this moment of her actually coming into her power and doing something about her situation.
Well, and that moment of realization as Brad goes in, you're watching me like, how do I say this? But he almost immediately kind of realizes that, or remembers from when he was a child how he was bitten, and tries to get out. And she's like, no. She grabs on and makes sure that her goal was successful. She
clenched. Clenched.
And
did the deed.
And then like
you go for it, David.
Oh my god! Like this scene, she gets up, steps back, spreads her legs, and the dick drops to the ground. And Mother, in the world's least secure cage for a violent dog, gets out and immediately picks it up and is like, "Mother, drop!" And she just chomps it down.
That's all around.
The whole film is building up, particularly him, as someone who deserves comeuppance, and as an audience, we see that comeuppance come through. And then she leaves home. I guess rather than facing the reality of like having to explain to everyone what she just did, she jumps on her bike and ends up hitchhiking, and it ends. Our final scene is she's fallen asleep in a car. It stops. The old man looks at her in the most creepy way, and when she tries to get out, he locks the door. And you have that moment of she's really empowered by who she is and what she can do. And she almost looks at the camera in this knowing way and then looks back to him and smiles, and you just go, I feel like this woman's now going to travel the world and bite the dicks off bad men. And it's not such a bad thing. Like, this is the new superhero.
She's run away from home because as far as she knows, she's killed 3 men and the police are potentially after her. And, her mom has died and she might feel completely alone and unable to, like, I guess, reconcile with the life she's leaving behind. But again, in her next step, there's another man ready and waiting to try to take advantage of her. But what I find a bit sad, like a bit tragic, is that, like, yes, she's empowered, but she also has to submit to her own defilement so that she can actually use the dentata.
Yeah, so
yeah.
That's a really good point. Like, she can't, like, she has to do something. If we take her at the beginning of this movie talking about how precious this is to her, she has to give that to someone. God, I sound like them. Every time she wants to use this thing that is a power for her.
Yeah, it's disturbing in my mind that, unfortunately, it's like it's more of a weapon if people know it's there, but before she can use it, she has to be violated.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is so tragic. And I think I feel like I see that playing out in the world, and that, for like, that, those cases where a woman has, like, maybe killed her rapist, but she's the one sent to jail. Or if you report a rapist, it probably does more damage to your reputation and your future than it does to the rapist. So it's like in as much as you are empowered,
it highlights
how
the
you enact
imbalance.
that power still hurts you at the same time. It's just, it's wonderful and tragic.
There's a great kind of imbalance in the world that, and it really personifies it.
And I think that's what I loved about the whole film, in that, even with the dentata, she's still vulnerable, because people don't know that it's there, this like hidden secret power. And that I think, and in modern day times, like if women had that, when you think of, sex trafficking, Me Too, all that stuff, the whole world would completely change
if that was a reality.
Yeah. That was a reality. So this film, I think the concept is more horrifying than what you see play out on the screen, and I think that's why I absolutely love it. Love this movie.
That's really brilliant. Before we wrap up, there's a few questions. So what's the campus line or moment of the film in your eyes?
Oh, look, I really don't know, because I will go back to that part to say, there are no loopholes, there is no back door. Just love that. I'm like, really?
It's a very self-aware moment.
Yeah. So that made me giggle, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but something Ryan said when they're having the discussion about, how he made a bet, and I don't know, there was something he said when he was like, when she was on top of him and he was just like hopping around. I can't remember what it was, but something about it made me laugh.
Yeah, he kind of says, you love it or something. I always knew you wanted it or something like that. Oh, it's not quite that.
Your mouth is saying one thing, but that sweet little pussy's telling a different story. Something like that.
Something that like an 18-year-old boy would think is really sexy, but it's just really not.
It's really not. And really disturbing, because, you read about, abusers saying to, young girls, yeah, but your pussy got wet, so it's fine.
Oh,
it's like, oh, God. Disgusting. So, yeah.
Well, with that, is there a scariest moment of this film?
Ooh, the gynecological scene.
Yeah.
Is the worst.
It was the most disturbing of all the scenes. I think the kind of the power imbalance and that kind of person in a position of authority really abusing it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And so we have a thing called the Camp Scary Scale. I may have asked you to review it. This is not a scale of value, rather it's a scale of classification. So where do you think this movie lands on that?
Look, I'm picking my own classification. I'm going to classify this as Squee.
I feel like Squee sits somewhere in the camp.
All right.
So for me, like if we were to give it a classification, I think it's, I would almost put it in the middle. It's like equally camp and scary in that like there are some really scary kind of confronting moments in this film, but also it deals with them in a way that's kind of self-aware and it encourages the audience to be like, this is ridiculous, but also it's making me think.
Yeah.
And something that, you don't get a lot in horror. Horror often doesn't give us this opportunity to think about the world like this and consider what if this one thing became the reality.
I agree. I definitely think you're spot on in the middle. Yes.
Thank you, Nari, for joining me to talk about teeth. It's been really fun and interesting, and I think one of the most interesting and deep conversations I've had on this podcast so far. For those of you at home, you can follow Camp Scary Squee on Instagram or Twitter by going to @CampScaryPod. If you have questions or suggestions, email campscarysquee@gmail.com and make sure to rate and review Camp Scary and Squee so other horror fans can find us. Thank you for joining us, and remember, don't scream.
They'll hear you.
My guest today loves her horrors to come with strong mystery and intrigue, a solid investigation by rational protagonists,